The letter arrived on a Wednesday, not by email, not by a phone call from an attorney's office asking him to hold. By actual letter, ivory envelope, handwritten address, first-class stamp, delivered by the same postal carrier who had been coming to Harlan's Auto and Body on Route 9 for 11 years and who set it on the service counter between a socket wrench and a half-eaten granola bar without comment. Because in a town of 4,000 people, you learned early not to editorialize about other people's mail. Harlan Doss did not open it immediately. He was in the middle of a brake job on a 2009 Silverado, and the rotors were not going to resurface themselves. He set the envelope on the corner of the counter, noted the return address, a law firm in Boston with a name that was 3 surnames long, and went back under the truck. He finished the brakes. He finished the alignment check that came after. He wrote up the invoice, called the owner, and locked the bay doors at 6:14, which was 14 minutes later than he usually locked up on Wednesdays, because the alignment had been worse than expected and he did not believe in leaving a car in worse condition than when it came in. Then he washed his hands at the utility sink, dried them on the shop towel that hung from his belt loop, sat down on the stool behind the counter, and opened the letter. He read it twice. He set it down on the counter. He picked up his phone and called his daughter. She answered on the second ring. She was 11 years old, and she always answered on the second ring because the first ring, she had explained to him once, was for deciding whether she wanted to talk, and the second ring was for committing to the decision. He had found this a reasonable system. Her name was Cora. She had her mother's red hair and her father's tendency to go quiet when she was thinking seriously about something. She was in 6th grade and was currently in the middle of a disagreement with her science teacher about whether the hypothesis section of a lab report needed to be written in future tense or present tense, a disagreement she was pursuing with the methodical patience of someone who understood that being right and being heard were 2 separate problems that required separate strategies. He said, "Hey." She said, "Hey back." Then she said his voice sounded different. He said he had gotten a letter. She said what kind of letter. He said the kind that took a while to explain. She said she would be home in 20 minutes. She was at the library. He said he would make dinner. She said what kind. He said pasta. She said okay and hung up. He put the letter back in the envelope and put the envelope in the drawer under the register, the one that also contained 3 broken pens, a tire pressure gauge, a photograph of Cora from her 3rd grade class picture, and a small cardboard rectangle on which he had written, 4 years ago in black marker, the name of the hospital and the room number where he had said goodbye to his wife. He had not thrown away the cardboard rectangle. Her name had been Diane. She had been a high school English teacher at Delafield Regional, and she had laughed at things Harlan didn't always immediately see the humor in, which had been one of his favorite things about her because it meant he was always a few seconds behind on a joke, and she would wait for him to catch up with the patient amusement of someone who knew the punchline would land. She had died 4 years ago of an illness that had moved faster than the doctors anticipated and slower than Harlan could process, and in the gap between those 2 speeds, he had learned something about time that he could not easily articulate, but that had changed how he moved through days. Cora had been 7. She had handled it with the particular gravity of a child who was old enough to understand the permanence and young enough not to have learned yet how to perform grief the way adults do. And Harlan had watched her and tried to take his cues from her, which was not how parenting was supposed to work, but which seemed, in the absence of better options, like the right approach. They had arrived at something together in the 2 years after. Not a resolution, because some things did not resolve, but an understanding, a way of carrying it that did not require it to be lighter than it was. He had not thrown away the cardboard rectangle. He started the water for the pasta. Harlan Doss had opened the garage on Route 9 at the age of 19, which was not a decision so much as a continuation. He had been working in his uncle's shop since he was 14, spending weekends and summers learning that mechanical problems were, at their core, problems of attention. A car did not fail randomly. It failed because something had been overlooked or deferred or asked to hold past the point where holding was reasonable. The failure was always preceded by a signal that someone had not read or had chosen not to act on. And the job of the mechanic was not simply to repair the damage, but to understand what it had been trying to say. He had brought that philosophy to Route 9 and applied it without interruption for 20 years. He knew the vehicles of Delafield the way a doctor knows long-time patients, by history, by tendency, by the particular way a specific problem manifested in a specific machine owned by a specific person. He knew that Tom Brewer's F-150 had a transmission that ran hot in summer and needed watching. He knew that the school district's bus fleet had been running on deferred maintenance for 3 years because the budget hadn't been there, and that at some point the deferred maintenance was going to become an emergency, and he had said so in writing to the district twice. He knew that Mrs. Garfield on Elm Street drove a 1994 Accord with 214,000 miles on it, and that she needed the car and could not afford a replacement, and that every time it came in, he treated it with the care of something that mattered enormously, because to her it did. This was the work. It was not glamorous, and it did not scale, and no one had ever written a profile about it in a regional publication. It was the kind of work that became invisible precisely because it was done well, which was, he had come to understand, the actual mark of quality in most things. He had raised Cora in the back office of that shop for the first 3 years of her life, before she was old enough for daycare, because there had been nowhere else and no one else, and he had not considered this a hardship so much as a logistical reality that required solving. She had slept in a portable crib behind the parts cabinet and been introduced to the sound of air compressors and socket wrenches before she could walk, and she had developed the enviable capacity to sleep through almost anything, which she had retained into 6th grade and which her teachers had mixed feelings about. He started the water for the pasta. Harlan Doss had opened the garage on Route 9 at the age of 19, which was not a decision so much as a continuation. He had been working in his uncle's shop since he was 14, spending weekends and summers learning that mechanical problems were, at their core, problems of attention. A car did not fail randomly. It failed because something had been overlooked or deferred or asked to hold past the point where holding was reasonable. The failure was always preceded by a signal that someone had not read or had chosen not to act on, and the job of the mechanic was not simply to repair the damage, but to understand what it had been trying to say. He had brought that philosophy to Route 9 and applied it without interruption for 20 years. He knew the vehicles of Delafield the way a doctor knows long-time patients, by history, by tendency, by the particular way a specific problem manifested in a specific machine owned by a specific person. He knew that Tom Brewer's F-150 had a transmission that ran hot in summer and needed watching. He knew that the school district's bus fleet had been running on deferred maintenance for 3 years because the budget hadn't been there, and that at some point the deferred maintenance was going to become an emergency. And he had said so in writing to the district twice. He knew that Mrs. Garfield on Elm Street drove a 1994 Accord with 214,000 miles on it, and that she needed the car and could not afford a replacement, and that every time it came in, he treated it with the care of something that mattered enormously, because to her it did. This was the work. It was not glamorous, and it did not scale, and no one had ever written a profile about it in a regional publication. It was the kind of work that became invisible precisely because it was done well, which was, he had come to understand, the actual mark of quality in most things. He had raised Cora in the back office of that shop for the first 3 years of her life, before she was old enough for daycare, because there had been nowhere else and no one else, and he had not considered this a hardship so much as a logistical reality that required solving. She had slept in a portable crib behind the parts cabinet and been introduced to the sound of air compressors and socket wrenches before she could walk, and she had developed the enviable capacity to sleep through almost anything, which she had retained into 6th grade and which her teachers had mixed feelings about. The letter was from the estate of a man named Gerald Whitmore, founder and chairman emeritus of Whitmore Industrial Holdings, a privately held conglomerate with interests in manufacturing, commercial real estate, and infrastructure contracting across 9 states. Gerald Whitmore had died 10 days earlier, at the age of 79, in a private hospital in Boston, survived by no direct descendants. two estranged nephews he had formally disinherited 7 years prior following a documented business dispute, and one biological son he had never acknowledged publicly, never contacted directly, and never named in any document during his lifetime except for a single instrument, his final will and testament, executed 14 months before his death, revised 3 times, and witnessed by 2 attorneys and a notary public. The biological son was Harlan Doss. Harlan was 39 years old. He had known about Gerald Whitmore for approximately 6 years, since his mother had told him the truth during a conversation she had clearly been rehearsing for much longer than that. She had been sick by then, not terminally but seriously, and the particular kind of honesty that illness produces had moved her to say things she had held back for decades. She had told him that his father, the man whose name was on his birth certificate, had raised him and loved him, and that none of what she was about to say changed any of that. Then she told him. Harlan had listened. He had asked 2 questions. He had thanked her for telling him and gone home and thought about it for a long time. He had not contacted Gerald Whitmore. He had looked him up. He knew what the man had built and who he was, and the broad shape of a life lived at a scale entirely unlike his own. He had read 2 articles about the business and 1 profile in a regional publication from several years back. He had closed the browser and not opened it again. He did not want anything from Gerald Whitmore. He was not sure what he would have said to him if they had ever been in the same room. He had a garage and a daughter and a house on Birch Street with a leaking gutter he kept meaning to fix, and the absence of a relationship with a man he had never known was a specific kind of loss, one without the shape of grief, because there was nothing to grieve that he had possessed in the first place. The pasta was ready when Cora came through the door. She dropped her backpack by the stairs with the precision of someone who had identified the exact location where a bag would be out of the way but retrievable, took off her jacket, washed her hands, and sat down at the kitchen table. She looked at him. She said something happened. He said yes. He served the pasta. He sat down across from her. He told her about Gerald Whitmore, starting from the beginning. Because he had always believed that Cora was capable of handling true things if they were given to her with enough context and without the protective softening that most adults applied to information before giving it to children, as if children were less capable of sitting with complexity than the adults who consistently underestimated them. He told her about his mother's conversation 6 years ago. He told her about choosing not to reach out. He told her about the letter. Cora ate her pasta while he talked. She did not interrupt. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking at her plate. She said, "So he left everything to you." Harlan said that was what the letter indicated. Yes. She said how much. He said he did not know the exact figure yet, that the attorneys needed to speak with him and there were processes involved. She said, but a lot. He said it appeared to be a significant amount. Yes. She thought about this. She said, did he want it? Harlan looked at his daughter. He said he did not know yet. She nodded. She said that was an honest answer. He said he tried. She said she knew. They ate. After dinner, Cora did her homework at the kitchen table while Harlan called the attorneys. The call lasted 47 minutes. When it ended, he sat at the table for a while with his phone face down in front of him and his hands resting on either side of it, looking at the surface of the table. Cora looked up from her homework. She said, was it bad? He said it was not bad. He said it was large. She said, how large? He said the estate, inclusive of holdings, real property, contracted assets, and liquid reserves, was valued at approximately $1.2 billion. Cora set her pencil down. She said that was very large. He said yes. She looked at him for a moment. She said, was he still going to fix Mr. Patterson's alternator tomorrow? He said yes. She said okay and picked up her pencil and went back to her homework. He went to the garage because that was where he went when he needed to think. Not the shop on Route 9, but the small 2-car garage attached to the house on Birch Street, where he kept his personal tools and the 1967 Ford Galaxie 500 he had been restoring in the hours between Cora's bedtime and his own for the past 3 years. The car was about 60% done. The body was clean. The engine was rebuilt. The interior was stripped and waiting. He sat on the stool beside the car and looked at it. He thought about his father, the one who had raised him, Raymond Doss, who had worked at the lumber yard for 31 years and taught him to change oil before he taught him to ride a bike, and who had died of a heart attack at 62 on a Tuesday morning with his boots on, which was the way Raymond Doss would have chosen to go if anyone had asked him. He thought about what Raymond had given him, which was not money or property, but a specific set of values about work and reliability and the kind of respect that comes from doing something well because it matters to do it well, not because anyone is watching. He thought about the town itself, Delafield, which had changed in the 20 years he had been running the garage in ways that small towns change when the larger economy stops looking in their direction. The hardware store had closed 4 years ago. The diner on Main was under new ownership for the third time in 8 years. 3 of the 6 storefronts on the main block were empty, their windows papered or dark, and the people who had operated those businesses had not moved to better opportunities so much as been absorbed into the quiet resignation of places that have been told in the indirect language of economic indifference that they do not matter enough to sustain. Harlan had watched this and continued doing what he did because he did not know how to do anything else and because the people in this town needed someone to fix their cars and he was the person who could do that. He had not thought of it as resilience or loyalty or any of the words that got applied to people who stayed in places like Delafield. He had thought of it as work, and work was what he did. He thought about Gerald Whitmore, who had apparently watched from a distance for decades and then, in the last year of his life, made a decision. He did not know what had moved the man to do it. He suspected he never would. The attorneys had told him there was a letter included with the estate documents, a personal letter from Gerald, sealed to be given to Harlan directly. He had not opened it yet. He was not sure he was ready. He picked up a socket wrench from the workbench and turned it in his hands the way he turned things when he was thinking, not using it, just feeling the weight and the mechanism. He set it down. He went back inside and opened the letter. It was 2 pages. Gerald Whitmore had not been a man given to elaborate language, which Harlan found he respected. The letter said that he had known about Harlan's existence from the beginning and that he had made choices that he did not intend to excuse or explain away because there was no explanation that would have been adequate. It said that he had watched from a distance, that he knew about the garage and the town and about Cora, though he did not say how, and that what he had seen had confirmed something he had understood too late in his own life, which was that the quality of a person was visible in how they built things quietly and maintained them faithfully when no one significant was watching. It said that the money was not a replacement for anything. It said that he was not asking for forgiveness or retrospective understanding. It said that the money was simply the most honest thing he had left to give, and that he hoped Harlan would use it in whatever way seemed right to him. The last line said, "I think you already know what matters." I did not learn it until it was too late to build anything with the knowledge. Harlan folded the letter. He sat with it for a long time. In the morning, he opened the shop on Route 9 at 7:30, which was when he always opened it. He fixed Mr. Patterson's alternator. He did a tire rotation on the school principal's minivan. He ordered 2 sets of brake pads for jobs coming in on Thursday. He ate a sandwich at the counter at noon and looked at the letter, which he had brought with him and set beside the register, and thought about what Gerald Whitmore had understood too late. He thought about Raymond again. Raymond had understood early. Raymond had shown up every day for 31 years to a job that did not pay enough and had never once suggested, in Harlan's presence, that showing up was something less than what it looked like. Raymond had taught him to look at a broken engine not with frustration, but with curiosity. The question always being, not what is wrong with this, but what does this need? It was a way of approaching things that turned out to apply to considerably more than engines. He thought Cora had inherited some of that. The way she looked at problems, the way she sat with difficulty without rushing toward resolution, that had come from somewhere, and he thought it had come from watching him the way he had watched Raymond, not through instruction, but through proximity and repetition and the ordinary accumulation of days. He thought Gerald Whitmore had perhaps seen something of this from his distance, in his own way, and had done the only thing left to him. The meeting with the attorneys took place 3 weeks later in Boston. Harlan drove up in his truck, which had 142,000 miles on it, and an intermittent rattle in the heat shield that he had not yet diagnosed, partly because the truck was not his priority, and partly because intermittent rattles required patience and the right road conditions to reproduce, and he had not yet had both at the same time. He wore the clothes he wore when he met with customers who needed something explained carefully. Clean dark jeans, a plain white shirt, his good boots. He brought a legal pad and wrote things down. The attorneys were professional and thorough. There were, as there always are in matters of significant estate, complications. 2 nephews had announced their intention to contest the will through their own legal representation. The contest was not expected to succeed. Gerald's legal team had built the document with the specific anticipation of exactly this challenge, which the senior attorney described in careful language that Harlan understood to mean that Gerald Whitmore had spent the last year of his life making sure his final decision held. Harlan asked the right questions. He took notes. When the meeting concluded and the attorneys walked him to the elevator, the senior partner paused and said something that was not in the prepared presentation, something he said in the manner of a man who has seen enough estates to have developed opinions about the people involved in them. He said that in his experience, the people who asked the fewest questions in these meetings and took the most notes were usually the ones who understood most clearly what they were looking at. Harlan said he appreciated that. The senior partner said he meant it. What Harlan did not mention to the senior partner, and what he thought about on the elevator ride down to the lobby, was that the 2 nephews had been in the building. He had not known they would be there. Their attorneys had requested a brief joint meeting before the formal estate session, a meeting the senior partner had offered Harlan the choice to decline, and Harlan had said he would attend because he did not see the point of avoidance. The nephews were both in their 50s. They wore suits that communicated success in the way that certain suits do, and they had the particular manner of men who had spent a long time believing a thing was certain and were now experiencing the specific discomfort of certainty being revised. The older one had done most of the talking. He had used phrases like family legacy and rightful continuity and the wishes of a man who was not in full capacity at the end, which the attorneys had noted without visible reaction. Harlan had sat across the table and listened with the same attention he gave to a customer explaining a problem he did not fully understand. He had not interrupted, he had not argued. When the older nephew had finally looked at him directly and said that he was a mechanic from a small town and that whatever Gerald might have written, he could not possibly understand what he would be taking on, Harlan had looked at him for a moment. He had said that he fixed things for a living and that the principle was the same regardless of scale. He had said that he had read every document in the estate packet and had additional questions for the attorneys that the nephews were welcome to stay for if they wanted to understand the situation as well as he intended to. The older nephew had looked at him the way people look when they have said the wrong thing to the wrong person and the realization is arriving slowly. Harlan had said he thought they were done here. Unless there was something else, there was not something else. He had gathered his legal pad and his notes and thanked the attorneys for the time and taken the elevator down alone. In the lobby, he had stood for a moment looking at the revolving door and the city street beyond it, the ordinary Tuesday morning traffic of a place that moved at a completely different speed than Delafield, and he had thought that Gerald Whitmore had built something in this world and had wanted it to go to someone who would use it the right way, and that the right way was not something that could be argued for in a conference room. It had to be demonstrated in the doing of it. He had walked through the revolving door and gone to find his truck. The senior partner said he meant it. On the drive back from Boston, Harlan stopped at a rest area on the highway and sat in the truck with a cup of coffee from a vending machine and thought about Delafield. He thought about the empty storefronts and the hardware store that had closed and the 3 families on his street alone that he knew were carrying the specific financial anxiety of people who had been doing everything right and still found themselves one unexpected expense from a different kind of life. He thought about what a person could do with what Gerald had built if that person understood the kind of town that Delafield was and the kind of people in it and what they actually needed, which was not charity but infrastructure and investment and the specific signal that someone believed the place and its people were worth continuing to build around. He thought it was possible that Gerald Whitmore had spent 40 years building something that he had not known how to use, and that the person who knew how to use it had been on Route 9 the whole time. Back home in Harlan's Auto and Body on Route 9, the week after Boston, it was a Tuesday, and a 2014 Honda Civic had come in with an engine light that turned out to be an oxygen sensor, which was a straightforward job. And while Harlan was under the hood, he thought about what he was going to do. He had talked to Cora about it over several evenings at the kitchen table, the way he had always talked to her about things that mattered, which was directly and without performing certainty he did not have. He told her what the estate contained. He told her about the contested will and what it might mean in terms of timeline. He told her about Gerald's letter, not reading it to her, but summarizing it honestly, because some things were his alone, and she understood that. She had asked him what he wanted to keep and what he wanted to change. He had said he wanted to keep the garage. She had said she knew that. He had said he wanted to keep Birch Street. She had said she knew that too. He had said he thought there were things that could be done with the resources that Gerald had built, things that Gerald himself had never done with them, things that had to do with the towns like this one and the people in them and the specific kind of investment that did not require visibility or applause, but that made the difference between a town that survived and one that didn't. Cora had listened to all of this with the focused quiet she applied to important things. She had said that sounded like something his dad would have done. He had looked at her. She had said Raymond, she meant. He had said yes. She had said she thought it was also something Gerald was trying to do, just very late. He had looked at the table for a moment. He had said maybe. She had said she thought the letter sounded like someone who had run out of time to fix things and was trying to fix the one thing he still could. She was 11 years old. He wrote that down in the legal pad that evening because he did not want to forget it. The will contest was resolved in Harlan's favor 8 months after the letter arrived on the counter between the socket wrench and the granola bar. The legal process had been exactly as complicated as the attorneys predicted and exactly as unsuccessful for the nephews as Gerald's team had ensured it would be. Harlan kept the garage on Route 9. He hired a second mechanic, a young man named Devon who had been doing oil changes at the National Chain Place 2 towns over and who was better than that job suggested and who deserved a place where the work was done correctly. He gave Devon the keys to the shop on the days when Harlan was in Boston or on calls with the trust attorneys or in meetings about the kind of thing that Harlan was now, quietly and without announcement, beginning to do with the resources he had inherited. He did not change his truck. He fixed the gutter on Birch Street, finally, on a Saturday morning in November, with Cora holding the ladder and informing him at regular intervals that he was tilting left, which he was. He finished the Galaxy in January. He drove it once around the block on a cold, clear morning, with Cora in the passenger seat and the heater working and the engine running the way an engine runs when everything in it has been rebuilt with the right parts and the right time, and someone who understood what the car was capable of and was willing to do the work to get there. Cora said it sounded good. He said it did. She said it sounded like it had been waiting. He said all fixed things had been waiting. That was the whole point of fixing them. She thought about that. She said she was going to write that down. He said he borrowed it from his father. She said which one. He thought about that for a moment, the question sitting in the cold January air between them, while the Galaxy idled and the town moved past the windows at walking pace, quiet and ordinary and exactly what it had always been. He said both of them. She nodded. She looked out the window. The town went on around them the way towns do, unhurried, without drama, full of the small and repeated acts that constitute a life built deliberately. A man who had worked the same road for 20 years, who had fixed things because they needed fixing and shown up because showing up was the only real argument against everything that broke. Who had raised a daughter in the image of the best he knew how to be, and who had, on a Wednesday, between a socket wrench and a granola bar, inherited $1 billion and kept the garage. He turned the Galaxy back toward Birch Street, both hands on the wheel. The way he had always driven, the engine answered every input with the steady, unhesitating confidence of something that had been understood completely and cared for exactly as it deserved.